Martin McDonagh's The Banshees of Inisherin dissects the human psyche and patriarchal decay through the microcosm of a 1923 Irish island. Framed by Freudian conflict, the desolate landscape mirrors the character's psychic entrapment, where Combs' self-mutilation and Patrick's vengeful spiral expose the futility of societal repression. Simultaneously, the film critiques toxic masculinity's ties to Ireland's civil war, juxtaposing male self-destruction with feminine resistance. Through psychoanalytical and gendered lenses, McDonagh reveals how legacies of violence and repression fracture both identity and nation, urging reckoning with the vulnerabilities buried beneath performative bravado. Utilizing the psychoanalytical lens, The Banshees of Inisherin is a deft exploration of life, death, and existential ramifications, including fear, self-preservation, and significance. The opening wide shots of Inisherin, encircled by turbulent waves and framed by jagged cliffs, visually mirrors the character's psychological imprisonment. The barren, repetitive landscapes captured through static cinematography symbolize emotional stagnation, rendering escape from the self impossible. As prime victims of the stagnation on the island, Colm and Padraig live dreary routines that are almost insignificant, as every day is wasted going to the pub and aimlessness. This monotonous existence fractures abruptly when jarring cuts and isolating mid-shots frame Colm's declaration.
I just have this tremendous sense of time slipping away in me, Padraig. And I think I need to spend the time I've left thinking and composing.
The sudden tonal shift in editing from lingering wide shots of mundanity to claustrophobic mid-shots fixated on Colm's rigid posture mirrors the superego's violent emergence, heightening the psychological rupture and symbolizing societal pressure overriding human connection. Colm's clenched jaw, emphasized in the mid-shot, is a visual anchor to pursuing his societal and moral legacy, while abrupt cuts between his tirade and Padraig's stunned silence dramatize the ego's collapse under the superego's tyranny. Padraig's stubborn attempts to reconcile escalates tensions until a seemingly unproblematic decision becomes irrational hostility, as Colm demands, "If you don't stop talking to me, I'm going to take these shears and I'm going to cut my fingers off one by one for every time you bother me." Highlighted by claustrophobic close-ups and stark chiaroscuro lighting, visually trapping the two in a psychological battleground, the scene is a pivotal actualization of Colm's extreme desire for solitude and pursuit of his legacy. Dim lighting carves a harsh line across Colm's face, symbolizing his fractured psyche's descent into performative martyrdom, while Padraig's widened eyes framed in shallow focus render his disbelief visceral, shattering his earlier mirage that this may all be some kind of joke. He confides in Dominic, accentuated through chaotic handheld camera work as the Eid, who urges him to just keep talking to him. The shaky, erratic movements reflect impulsive drives clashing with reason, while abrupt cuts to Colm's self-mutilation as diegetic silence punctuates each severed finger. This act demonstrates the tyrannical enforcements of societal ideals and his need for purpose in his life, an unnecessary punishment for his punitive quest for immortality, destroying parts of himself to create art as a Freudian displacement of guilt. In his inner turmoil, he expresses, "I'm trying not to listen to the despair." The tight close-up and shallow focus in the confession booth visually traps his subconscious retreat, revealing to the audience his repression of vulnerability to uphold a facade of control. This duality collapses when Dominic's corpse is discovered. A static wide shot frames the villagers' collective indifferences. Their silhouettes blurred in the misty background, while Dominic's body lies crisply in the foreground. His death is pitiful, being a victim of paternal abuse and communal ridicule. He embodies the psyche's scapegoated vulnerabilities, epitomizing the superego's cruelty. The diegetic silence only stresses how his death is met with apathy from the community, and their societal failure to nurture through this individual's despair amplified by societal negligence. Initially, Padraig as the ego mediates between kindness and personal needs. However, his descent into spite, triggered by the death of his donkey that he blames Colm for, marks the collapse of the ego's defense as he burns Colm's house, its luminous juxtaposed against the island's otherwise muted palette. This symbolic mise-en-scene mirrors the ego's collapse. Fire, once a metaphor for warmth and community, becomes annihilation. Driven by the Eid, Padraig's retaliation encapsulates Freud's return of the repressed. Suppressed rage and humiliation reach a crescendo where his identity as a nice guy is invalidated. Padraig and Colm's irrational dispute mirrored a civil war, framing both futile conflicts deep-rooted in masculine pride, while women's erasure parallels the marginalisation of female voices in national narratives. Former allies turned into enemies over abstract principles of legacy and control, with Colm's abrupt severing of their friendship. "I just don't like you no more," reflecting the war's ideological fracturing, reducing human bonds to brittle ego battles. His self-mutilation, sacrificing fingers to spite Padraig, symbolizes the paradox of patriarchal masculinity, violent self-destruction in pursuit of immortality. This symbolism is reinforced through wide shots of the island's barren landscape, juxtaposed with tightly framed close-ups of Colm's bleeding hands, symbolically conflating male violence with national trauma. The bloodied fingers evoke Ireland's blood sacrifice rhetoric during the Civil War, where young men were idealized as martyrs for hollowed ideals. Padraig's donkey's death by choking on Colm's severed fingers serves as a grotesque metaphor for Ireland's suffocation under masculine violence and consequences of repressed emotions under patriarchy. Notably, the donkey, traditionally emblematic of resilience in the Irish spirit, becomes collateral damage in the men's field, echoing the Civil War's toll on bystanders ensnared by ideological crossfire. Siobhan Padraig's sister is portrayed as a beacon of feminine agency in Miss Inisherin's patriarchal decay. Her sharp-tongued critiques you're fucking boring detach her from male pettiness, positioning her as the film's moral compass. Framed in liminal spaces, doorways thresholding confinement and freedom, windows reflecting her dual role as observer and outsider, her isolation becomes a visual manifesto of resistance. Furthermore, books and typewriters linger in the foreground, demonstrating a self-empowerment and a counter-narrative to male-dominated storytelling, echoing how Irish women's contributions to independence were erased post-Civil War. Moreover, during pub scenes, she is blocked by men in the foreground, mirroring women's exclusion from Irish political discourse. Her eventual departure serves as a literal and metaphorical escape, contrasting the men's mental entrapment in cycles of violence and the failings of patriarchal nation in nurturing its women. As wide shots of the vast sea and chaotic island are captured, both juxtapose her cramped mainland library job and the orderly shelves. Through this juxtaposition, McDonagh posits that healing requires not merely departure, but the active rejection of masculinist histories, a thesis amplified by Siobhan's trajectory from marginalized voice to architect her own narrative. Through the psychoanalysis and gender theory lens, the Banshees of Inisherin becomes a haunting portrait of fractured identity and national trauma. McDonagh exposes how repressed fear, toxic masculinity, and the pursuit of legacy corrodes both self and society, mirroring Ireland's post-colonial wounds. While Colm and Padraig embody the self-destructive cycles of masculine pride, Siobhan's quiet resistance offers a counter-narrative of female agencies and healing. Ultimately, the film urges recognition of vulnerabilities not as weakness, but as the first step towards breaking cycles of violence and forging new inclusive narratives beyond patriarchal decay.